Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the PAD Candidate Forum for the International Tribunal. My name is Andrew Sagan. I'm the Executive Director. I've been with Phi Alpha Delta for just over 25 years. This candidate forum will include our candidates for the position of International Tribunal. As a reminder, this candidate forum is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to all members on the convention landing page, hopefully tomorrow. Now for a few ground rules before we begin. We have allotted 1 hour for tonight's forum since we only have 3 candidates. You might only see 2 right now. We'll probably be joined by Carrie Smith in just a few minutes. We have allotted the 1 hour, and each candidate will have no more than 2 minutes to make an opening remark as we begin. I will then ask candidates a series of prepared questions which have not been provided to the candidate ahead of time. We'll do this round robin, so each candidate will have the equal time to go first, second, or third, depending on the case may be. Following these questions, and if times permit, I will ask questions posed by attendees. For those attendees, if you would like to submit questions to the Q&A feature in Zoom, I will get to those if we do have time. Following the Q&A section, each candidate will be given no more than 3 minutes to make any closing remarks. And in all cases, if any candidate exceeds their time for whether it's 2 minutes or 3 minutes, I will be muting the candidates. This evening, we will hear from Jeff Crane, Dan McDowell, and Carrie Smith. Sister Smith is delayed in joining us due to an unexpected work obligation, but when she arrives, we'll allow her to make her opening remarks. We will not ask her the questions that has already been posed to Dan and Jeff, but she will just jump into the forum just as we're going on. So we're going to get started right now with opening statements, and we're going to start with Jeff Crane. Jeff.
Thank you, Andrew. Jeff Crane, Vought Chapter, current International Associate Tribune. I see Carrie has just joined us. Thank you. Briefly, I'm currently sitting as an International Associate Tribune. I've really enjoyed these last 2 years, as well as the previous 2 years on the Trib before that. And I'm running again for the Trib. I think that the Trib is serves a very important role in our fraternity. It is, as most people know, generally removed from the day-to-day affairs of the fraternity and the executive policies, which is the board and the executive office's function. And we serve a completely different role, which is to adjudicate cases and controversies as they come up. Hopefully, we don't have many of those. And fortunately for the fraternity, we haven't had very many of those, which makes our job easier, which means everybody's being fraternal for the most part. And we enjoy that. And that's the way it should be. But if called upon, we will do what we need to do. And from time to time, we've had to adjudicate matters in the realm of disciplinary committee, which is kind of a new function. And so we're still all working through that. And we're trying to work out the kinks in that and do what's right for the fraternity and figure out what's best as we move forward. And I look forward to doing that process again for another 2 years and would ask for your vote as another Trib officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Dan, how about you for your 2-minute opening statement? Go ahead.
Sorry, I was struggling to unmute myself, embarrassingly. Hi, my name is Dan McDowell. I'm also currently serving as an Associate Tribune. I have a history with the fraternity that goes back long enough that I won't go through it because it just makes me feel a little old. So I've been involved since law school, served in several positions on the IEB prior to this. And I've been serving on the Trib and really also enjoyed it, mainly because the Trib is made up of some great people, and I'm glad to be able to work with them. I did want to maybe touch on a little bit very directly as to why I'm running for this particular position again, and why I served in the position previous. I'd always said I wouldn't run for a position inside the organization. I didn't think I could serve, in the highest capacity of my abilities. And just so everybody here is aware, you might know I'm an attorney and a certified public accountant, which is a weird combination because I'm also a mediator and an arbitrator. I currently sit on the consumer arbitration panels and mediated or co-mediated in federal court and state court. So I have a long experience of alternative dispute resolution, which is why I like serving in this position, because I feel like I can serve the org best in this fashion. I currently serve in a position where I'm negotiating commercial contracts, so I have to understand that side of it too. So one thing that, and I think I failed to emphasize this a little bit, is I do think that process wise, we could tighten up a few things. And I'm hoping that in the next biennium, if I end up elected to this position, we can make certain process improvements that perhaps address efficiency and clarity in ways. And I say that without way of criticism of the current trib, because I've been criticizing myself. But I feel it might be important to emphasize that in the hopes that we can have a little bit of dialogue about that through the questions. So I'll pause there, and thanks everybody.
Thank you, Dan. And Carrie, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement. Good to see you.
Thank you, and apologize for being late. I was coming from a work obligation. Good afternoon, good evening, I guess, depending upon when people actually view this. Like Jeff and Dan, I've been involved with the fraternity for a while, since I graduated. I went to law school in 2000, and I've been a member in various, active in various positions throughout the fraternity. I think touching on experience and why I am running for the trib is one, like Dan said, I think that this is something that fits both my competencies and my abilities to serve the fraternity at this time. People may not know, for the last 10 years, I've worked in the licensing enforcement section of the Arizona Attorney General's office. Our section represents the licensing agencies for the state of Arizona. Primarily, I've worked with the nursing, medical, and physician assistance boards. And a lot of what I do in my day-to-day professional life, I think, is applicable to the role of the Tribune, which is, one is I assist the agencies that I work with in adjudicating licensing discipline cases. And a lot of that is obviously involving, applying the law as it exists to the question of whether or not that's been violated. And, if so, what the appropriate sanction for that might be. It's obviously a case-by-case determination, while maintaining fidelity to the documents and consistency to the best possible. And assisting the agencies in determining whether or not they're, operating within their scope and function, and evaluating those questions. And I think that that's the essential functions of the tribunal for the fraternity. So I've had the privilege of working with both Jeff and Dan in previous iterations of our roles in the fraternity. And I would look forward, if elected, to doing that again in this upcoming biennium. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. All right, well, we're going to get started with the questions. The first question is going to go to Jeff Crane. Many of our members do not know what the International Tribunal even does. Can you explain your view as the role of the International Tribunal and why it is an important part of our international leadership?
Thank you, Andrew. That's a great question, because it goes to the heart of what we do as a fraternity, as to why we have a tribunal. I've heard it said, and this is an analogy. It's not exactly accurate, but it's a good way to understand it, that generally the legislative body of the fraternity is the convention, the international chapter, when they're convened, because they make the rules, they write the policies and things on a macro scale, and it's a representative body of all chapters across the fraternity. That's one way to look at it. The executive body of the fraternity is the executive office and the international executive board. That's one way to look at that, because they execute the policies of the fraternity, which leaves the tribunal as basically the judiciary of the fraternity in some sense. While we have certain rules within our Illinois corporate mandates that prevent the tribunal from being a coexisting board, I think that the trib still has a very important role, because it helps maintain the fraternalism in the fraternity. It helps maintain our sense of history and our sense of traditions. It also assists the executive board where there are opportunities that need to be adjudicated, where the board may not be the best body to deliberate through that and take time to go through our policy manual or historical documents or things like that. And the TRIB has the freedom and the ability to do that while being independent and removed from those day-to-day policy decisions. And so I think it's an important function to provide a separate set of eyes, a separate set of usually very experienced. I mean, there's at least 60 years of experience in the fraternity between the three of us here to have seen things at every level from the law school chapter leadership all the way through international executive board and TRIB. So I'm looking forward to fulfilling that role within the fraternity and moving it forward as we further adapt it.
Thank you, Jeff. Same question, Dan. I'll repeat it for you just so you know. Many of our members do not know what the International Tribunal does. Can you explain your view as the role of the International Tribunal and why it is such an important part of our international leadership? Dan.
Oh, kind of wish we had a clock because, like Jeff, I felt myself speeding up at the end, not knowing where we were. I almost wish it was on there. So I'll use part of my time to uselessly complain about that. Sorry. I'll give you my view. I think it might be a little different, and it may not be accurate, but I'll tell you how I view it. I look at the tribunal as basically a contractual ADR for members of the organization. You have a dispute that you can raise to the leadership, and this is one of the few places that I shouldn't say few, but in a unique and positive way, that if you disagree with the determination by that leadership, you can bring it to the TRIB. You have an opportunity, which to Jeff's point is far more fraternal than an executive making a decision, stamping it, and all is done. So in this case, it's brought to a group that I hope will be made up of those faces that I see, because as you know, whether you view it as a positive or not, we've had a great deal of experience and seen a lot. And I think that for the three of us, and I can't say enough about everybody on this call, so I'm going to be brilliant with praise for everybody, because everybody that's running is fantastic. But our ability to look at it and not say, oh, here's the rule, and it should be this way. The reality is, yeah, here's the rule. Here's what we've seen. Here's where it's gone wrong. Here's where we'd like to see it imposed better. And yes, board, you may have been right on the numbers, but the reality is, for the spirit of the fraternity, it should be something else. And so I think it's extraordinarily fair, especially as Jeff said, in light of the changes to more of a corporate governance, corporate structure, command structure, to have this unique board that has the opportunity to impose, perhaps where appropriate, a more fraternal determination in the event that that is correct. And that may not be a popular thing, but I think it's a wonderful thing. And I think given what we have to do under the laws that we operate under, as long as we are permitted to have this amount of individuality and compassion, we should maintain it.
Thank you, Dan. All right, Carrie, same question. I'll repeat it just so you hear it. It is, many of our members do not know what the International Tribunal does. Can you explain your view as the role of the International Tribunal and why it's an important part of our international leadership? Carrie.
Yeah, I mean, I think building on again what Jeff and Dan have said, the role is, I think, essentially twofold within the documents. Is one is to adjudicate cases and controversies that arise during a biennium, and also, there's this new role of addressing potential disciplinary issues if they arise. And I think that it's important to have a body that is essentially, to the best, as best as possible, is non-biased to look at these issues and come to a determination about whether or not, what the appropriate outcome should be, and whether or not there's been a violation of the governing documents. And so I think this creation of this as an independent body, I agree with what Jeff says. I think it's a great way to maintain fraternalism in providing a dispute resolution process within the fraternity.
Thank you, Carrie. All right, we're going to start with you, Dan, this time. What skills and attributes do you possess that will allow you to succeed as a member of the International Tribunal? Dan.
I was an only child in a family of very tall people where I ended up being the shortest one, and I had to negotiate for my life. No, sorry, that was just that was childhood trauma coming up. I shouldn't have. I thought I put that away. No, I am only half joking. I have pretty much my entire life been negotiating things, knowingly or unknowingly. There was a time in college where I was a part of Greek life, and they were mandating rules that everybody had to sign, and they had consequences, and it was like the worst written contract you'd ever seen. And I told all my brothers and sisters that we were not going to say a word in this interfraternity meeting because everybody who spoke up was going to get kicked off of campus. And who's the first person that shot off their mouth? Me. And I ended up leading a negotiation in my senior year, right before I'm going to law school, against the entire administration to try to develop a fair policy with respect to Greek life on campus. I don't know if it was the brightest thing I ever did or the dumbest thing I ever did, but it's who I am. Went through law school and tried to be a tax attorney and pivoted hard to being a mediator. Ended up being a professional negotiator for a company that sells power plant control system contracts. They liked me there enough to put me in charge of contract management, and then they put me in charge of a project team of engineers, which was as bizarre as it sounds. But I had to help, fix some structural things with teams, and I did that. And it all is conflict resolution, no matter what anybody tells you, especially when you're not an engineer and you're trying to help engineers do their job. What is the conflict? What's not getting done? How do we resolve it? You have to be extremely creative. Professionally right now, as I mentioned, I still do that. I'm the senior counsel and head of commercial legal for a large IFS and catering company. It's a global company, but obviously my business unit is North America. So professionally, it's been my negotiation and dispute resolution has been my life. Part of that is I've taken and trained people in mediation. I've taken every mediation course that I could potentially take. I've mediated all the way from magistrate court up through co-mediating in federal court. As I said, I'm an American AAA arbitrator on the consumer panel. It was active. It's what I do. It is apparently what the world thinks my professional competency is because I can't sing.
Great. Thank you, Dan. All right, Carrie, we're going to have the same question. The question is again, what skills and attributes do you possess that will allow you to succeed as a member of the International Tribunal? Carrie.
Oh, wow. So I, again, as I said briefly in my opening statement, I think a lot of the role of an international tribune is what I do in my professional life. I assist my client agency in ensuring that their actions are in conformity with with statutes and rules that are applicable to them. So that sort of analysis about whether or not conduct conforms with the law is my day-to-day professional life. And Dan, as a lifelong short person, I also have a long personal history with negotiation as a survival strategy. So I think those two pieces, and also again to be serious, because this is I think a serious position. The other thing is that I do again in my day-to-day life is assist the boards with making fair adjudicatory decisions with regard to disciplinary matters that come in front of it. So this is just kind of what I do. So I think that would apply really well to this role.
Thank you, Carrie. And now, Jeff, what skills and attributes do you possess that will allow you to succeed as a member of the International Tribunal?
Thank you, Andrew. In addition to the fraternity experience that we've all talked about already, I spent 23 years as a commissioned officer in the U.S. Army, where I got to lead people as few as a team of 3, all the way up to hundreds, and a variety of staff positions. Inspector General for 3 years, which is a fantastic position. I really enjoyed that, as well as in my private practice. I deal mostly with estates and probate and adult guardianships. I act as a trustee. I frequently help families who are in difficult family strife and conflict, trying to figure out how they're going to manage their way through this grief-stricken probate to reach a family settlement agreement that seems fair to as best as we can, while still meeting the intent and wishes of the decedent. And acting as a trustee, I both have documents to follow, but realistic practicalities to try to put into place. And so I find myself doing that on a regular basis, following the governing document, but applying some common sense along the way to what seems fair and what's going to be the best result for everyone involved. And I think that's a lot of what we have to do on the trib as well. You know, I would echo what Dan and Carrie have said, that what we do in our daily lives is skills that we practice, and those are what we develop as practicing attorneys. We have a variety of practices, but I too have done mediations just like they have, and I think those are invaluable skills that just take time to build up. And so our experience as both practicing attorneys and as Phi Alpha Delta members for a variety of years serves us all, including myself, well to be on the tribunal.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. Carrie, you're up first. So we always hear that the tribunal decides cases and controversies. For those who have served on the tribunal, what has been your approach to handling a case or controversy? And for those of you who have not served yet, how would you approach a case or controversy?
Well, I
Carrie.
think, okay, thank you. I think two things. One is obviously a thorough understanding of the provisions of the governing documents that are at issue in the dispute, as well as the facts and circumstances of the dispute itself, and applying those to the documents. And then, finding a fair and I think straightforward result would be my approach on the board. Or on the board. See, this is where I get back to, this is what I do for a living. It's not the board, it's the tribunal. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Carrie. And Jeff, the same question. What is your approach to handling a case or controversy?
My approach, I believe, is to look at what was alleged, what was the applicable rule or governing document that seems to be in play, and then apply the most common sense analysis that we can put to that to reach a fair result, and then decide only what we need to decide. I don't see it's the trib's role to rewrite the entire document right then and there in that opinion, but decide what we need to get us past this controversy for the moment, and to inject as much fraternalism as we can into whatever that decision-making process is, and let the fraternity get back to what it was doing before the case or controversy. But yeah, basically it's kind of an IRAC if you want to look at that. What's the issue? What's the rule? What's our analysis? And let's conclude. And let's be done with it. And let's get the fraternity back on its feet and keep moving. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. And Dan, same question. What has been your approach to handling a case and controversy?
Sorry, I need to be better at the unmuting. I can't tell if you're unmuting me or if I have to. You did tell us this and I don't remember. Sorry about that. And I also changed the lighting here, so hopefully everybody can still see me, because I couldn't see me for a minute there. Anyway, I approach this a little bit differently, and maybe again, I don't know that I'm right about this. Just based on my experience with things, I always find I'm coming to things with certain biases, and I'll learn a little bit about the case, and then I like to take a little bit and figure out, all right, what do I think should happen here? And then I need to be very careful of that, of pushing toward that outcome. So I kind of like to hip check myself, because I know what I think is right, and I like to try to be aware of that. I know it sounds a little new agey, but it helps me say, okay, I know I'm going to think this direction. What if I'm wrong? And try to open the aperture a little bit. One of the other points I think is important, second, is something Jeff hit on, is precision in answering the question. I think often you're proposed with a question, and very similar to what you see, perhaps in the Supreme Court. I know it may not be popular right now, but when you really get into it, what is the technical question being asked and decided? I don't know what the ripple effect is, but what technically are we deciding? So I think it's very important, as Jeff said, to be ultra precise as to what is being decided, because you have to be careful. I mean, what really is the question? You have to make sure that you answer that question. And then again, it very generally after that comes down to what are the facts and circumstances presented. And really, from an arbitration standpoint, you have to let the parties present the case, right? Going back to the initial point of what biases am I bringing to the decision, I think I know what I want to see, but at the same time, you have to be fair to everybody and look at what's just been presented to you, not what you want to impute, not what perhaps you wish they would have provided, and without asking queries that are unfair one way or the other. It's you just have to look at on the four corners of what I'm deciding with what I've been presented. What is the appropriate decision under the framework that we're utilizing? And it's harder than it seems.
Great. Thank you, Dan. We have a question from one of our attendees. And this will go to Jeff. You can answer first. For all the candidates, what role should DEI have in the tribunal's decision-making processes? Jeff.
This was asked of me in the nominations committee, and I'm going to hope to give a similar answer, which is I think we should have, as tribunal members, a blindfold on, and we should look at the conduct that is alleged, and we should look at the rule that is applied. It doesn't matter to me whether you're a male, female, somewhere in between, non-binary. It doesn't matter to me what your preferences are. We're all members of the fraternity, and so every member of the fraternity gets an equal look at what the conduct was that was alleged, and whether it was whether the case or controversy, depending on what it is. We look at that with a blind eye, is I guess what I'm trying to say. And so those initiatives, or whatever they may be, don't seem to fit well within our role, because that's not our role. We need to look at things with a blind eye, in the sense of it doesn't matter who's bringing it, doesn't matter what they're alleging as against whom. We need to apply what's alleged and what the conduct was, and does it violate our fraternal codes or not, and go from there as fairly and openly as we can.
Thank you, Jeff. And we'll go to you, Carrie. And the question is, what role should DEI have in the tribunal's decision-making processes?
I think that it should have some role, but I agree a lot with what Jeff said, in that we should be applying, especially when it comes to disciplinary cases, we should be applying the facts and circumstances of the case. We should be looking at them as unbiased as possible, without regard to any issues. I think that any disciplinary proceeding, I think there's two phases to it, right? Was there a violation of the fraternity's rules or codes of conduct? And if so, what's the appropriate sanction for that? And I think understanding the where the individual, when it comes specifically to determining what the appropriate sanction is, I think determining the facts and circumstances of the individual person, whether or not there's mitigating or aggravating factors with regard to that, I think is important, and it might have a role there. But I think the initial determination of whether or not there's been a violation of the fraternity's rules, I think should be as unbiased as possible. So that I think that's the best, most fair response to that question.
Thank you, Carrie. And Dan, what role should DEI have in the tribunal's decision-making processes? Dan.
That's a really big question. And I'm assuming that the asker is appropriately knows how big that question is. So I would say that's a very difficult thing to answer in 1 minute or 2 minutes. I'll try to answer it as succinctly and hopefully as directly, but it's almost like you have to define some of the terms. When I look at it, I think inherently it's a question of bias and inclusion. And so when I look at these, it kind of goes back to, and it's hard for everybody to do this. It really is. But that's why I find it valuable to say, all right, where is my where is my particular, everybody has biases, good or bad, in your decision making framework. Where's my head leading me based on what I've seen so far? And as long as I can orient myself to say, okay, I have a sense that I'm drifting decision wise this way. It may be right, it may not, but I need to be aware of that when I look at the totality of the circumstances. And I need to, to the other's point, justice needs to be about as blind as possible. And for the trib to make the decision, it needs to be made on the four corners of the facts. And again, the evidence presented, not what we impute from it, but what is here. Does it fit the question? Does it answer the question for either side? So I guess when I look at the extraordinarily broad and complex world that is colloquially called DEI, I look at myself as the decision maker and try to right those or correct those, or at least have some awareness of whatever bias I'm operating under as I'm working through the decision process. So that's how I view it in the process. But generally, I agree on the decision framework. It should be as blind and fact-based as possible to be as fair as possible.
Thank you, Dan. And next question, we'll start with Carrie. This past biennium, there were changes made to the dispute, conflict, and complaint processes to ensure that it included a step-by-step guide for investigating complaints and a timeline of how the disciplinary matters and appeals of those matters would proceed. How would you work with the International Executive Board to continue to find ways to improve the dispute, conflict, and complaint process? Carrie.
Well, that's a big question. And I think that to the extent that the trib is the one executing those rules and processes, and the trib and the executive board is the one that's setting and responsible for setting those. I think that the guidance has got to come first from the executive board with regard to what that process should be. That having been said, if there's opportunities for us as the trib on maybe in an after action fashion to give feedback as with regard to whether or not those processes and identify if there are problems with those processes, if we feel like that they are on implementation appropriate and fair, I think the trib can give that feedback maybe through the decision process or some other way, just so that the board has an understanding of whether or not the rules that they're setting are workable for the parties involved.
Thank you, Carrie. We'll go to you, Jeff. I'll repeat the question since it was a long one. This past biennium, there were changes made to the dispute, conflict, and complaint process to ensure that it included a step-by-step guide for investigating complaints and timeline of how disciplinary matters and appeals of those matters should proceed. How would you work with the International Executive Board to continue ways to improve that the dispute, conflict, and complaint process? Jeff.
Thank you, Andrew. Great question. And again, like Sister Carrie said, this is not a straightforward, easy answer, because with any new process, there are 1,000 different ways to implement it and 1,000 different ways to create it. And until you sit down and try to write out all the details for something like that, that's when you begin to realize where there are gaps, where there are potential roadblocks, where there are too short a timeline, too long a timeline. And so I think it's going to take several iterations, maybe a dozen or more iterations of doing this before we as a fraternity, a part of which is the trib, a part of which is the executive board, a part of which is the members who are bringing these complaints or whatever. So I think it's going to be one of those, we have to test it out and we have to try it and see what works and see what doesn't work. Because until then, we're all kind of just making our best educated guesses of what the framework should look like and how it's going to work. And I think we all are on the same page as to wanting it to work and wanting it to do what it's designed to do. But how we get there is going to take some time and some patience. And so I'm willing to do that patient work with the executive board, of course. But I think it's going to take a few stumbles as a fraternity to kind of figure out how this is going to look and what's going to work best for everyone, timelines and things like that.
Thank you, Jeff. And Dan, same question. This past biennium, there were changes made to the dispute, conflict, and complaint process to ensure that included a step-by-step guide to investigate complaints and a timeline of how the disciplinary matters and appeals of those matters would proceed. How would you work with the International Executive Board to continue to find ways to improve the process of the dispute, conflict, and complaint process?
In any way possible and as much as possible. And the reason I say that is because I'll be a little critical of our process. I think it's slow. I think it could be faster. As Jeff said, sometimes when you try to fix a process, you break it and then you break it again. So I can't say that I would do this, just do it faster. That's not the right answer, and that's not fair to anybody. But I think in order to maintain, what we know to be this uniquely fraternal aspect of the organization and in disputes that are, making serious decisions about somebody's future with the organization, I think that those decisions should be made as quickly as can be made well. I think things could be done there. I would rather, and I don't think this was, at least I'm not aware of it. I don't think it's a breach or a problem of independence to work, hand in hand with actively and aggressively with the board to implement better processes for the determination of cases and controversies. I don't think that's a problem. I mean, I guess unless somebody calls into question that process itself, but at the same time, I think that's a risk you have to run. So I just, in order to, it can't just be something we say, it has to be something we do and that we show. And I think the best thing we could do is attempt to expedite the process as much as possible so that those decisions get made quickly, so people aren't hanging out there for a long time wondering, when it's them involved. I really think these things should be turned around in weeks, and I think it can be done eventually. Again, to Jeff's point, it has to be attempted, but that's how I view it.
Thank you, Dan. We're actually going to ask you a question right off the bat, so you might as well just stay unmuted.
Okay.
When should a member of the International Tribunal recuse themselves from hearing a case or controversy or ruling on the appeal of a disciplinary matter?
Well, I think that's an interesting question from the standpoint of what standard you apply. I mean, being an arbitrator, when I get a potential appointment, just like anybody who's in law practice, again, I'm not in public practice, I'm in private for corporation, you have to do a conflicts check. In addition, a little different than a law firm is that I have to disclose any potential conflicts. I just did it recently, and it's what you do. And so, in my opinion, if someone could look at the decision and say, as harsh as a standard as it is, I guess that's just how, Dad was on the ethics committee, so maybe this is how I grew up. If you could say that the decision you made or that the group made was tainted in any way by some kind of a relationship, I follow the mere appearance of any impropriety standard. It's when you recuse yourself. Now, is it that simple? No, it's really never that simple, and we all know that. But I start from an aggressive standpoint of being a professional neutral. I need to be as neutral as possible. So it's a pretty high bar. So that's how I view it. If you could have somebody question the integrity of the decision, if you think that could happen by a reasonable person, or even a slightly unreasonable person, then I'd say you'd have to recuse yourself.
Thank you, Dan. Carrie, the same question is, when should a member of the International Tribunal recuse themselves from hearing a case or controversy or ruling on the appeal of a disciplinary matter? Carrie.
So this is something that, again, that I deal with professionally, advising my client agencies on when a recusal is appropriate. And the things we look at are things like, and I will say this, this fraternity is a family, and we know each other. And oftentimes I think that cases and controversies, or especially disciplinary matters, could come in front of the tribunal involving an individual, and I think the question first in that situation should be one, do you are you, even if the individual involved, are you still able to fairly and unbiased in an unbiased manner adjudicate the matter? Or do you have, something else that I should ask myself, and I would ask myself is, do I have knowledge of the specific facts and circumstances of the case in a way that would prohibit me from providing, an unbiased decision in a matter? So those are a couple of the things that I would look at if I was, having to make that kind of a determination. Um, and again, what Dan said, the appearance of impropriety, I think is important. And I think that I think that it would be important not just to, when that potential appearance of impropriety exists, to state, again, as my friend has often said, in your out loud voice, are you familiar with this person? Does it prohibit you from making an unbiased decision? And putting that out there so that people can feel comfort in the fairness of the decision that's made.
Thank you, Carrie. And Jeff, same question. When should a member of the International Tribunal recuse themselves from hearing a case or controversy or ruling on the appeal of a disciplinary issue?
Well, I believe we have actually a rule of the International Tribunal that addresses this. So I would look to that standard first, because we've already had to think through this and we've come up with a rule for this. That being said, I agree in large part with everything that my other two colleagues have said, which is if there's an actual conflict of interest where, as the tribunal member, I would have a vested interest in the outcomes in some way, in any way, or the appearance of a vested interest in the outcome, then of course there should be a recusal. In the sense that we all have the opportunity to just know the members involved, but it's got to be a lot more than that, because otherwise you end up recusing all the time and we don't have any adjudications at all. So I agree that if there's a conflict of interest, or if there's a appearance of impropriety, or there's an inability to set aside information that's going to, and still be able to make an unbiased decision, still be able to make a fair decision, then I think that's appropriate to move forward. It's only when those things can't be met that I think recusal would be appropriate. So that's the best I can answer on that one, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We have one question from an attendee, and we'll start with you, Carrie. Does the tribunal have jurisdiction over a matter where a member disagrees with a decision by the International Executive Board? Do you believe that the tribunal has authority to overturn an IEB decision? Carrie.
That's a great question, and I think I would need to look at the documents and make that determination. I think the whole role of the IEB to determine cases and controversies, I mean, that's essentially that piece of it. So if the tribunal's discretion is limited in any way by the governing documents to make that determination, I think I would be guided by that.
Thank you. Jeff, same question. Does a tribunal have jurisdiction over a matter where a member disagrees with the decision by the International Executive Board? Do you believe that the tribunal has the authority to overturn an IEB decision? Jeff.
Yes and no. Again, it depends on the way the process comes to us. Because of the non-dual board requirement of the state of Illinois, there are only certain things that the tribunal can, without question, impose. But that's been kind of the struggle with the fraternity for the last few years, is figuring out that balance of when do we defer to the tribunal to make adjudications, but yet still maintain the separateness of that one board for final rulings. And so I think our documents, at least as they currently stand, are trying to find that balance of deferring to the tribunal, but it's not ultimately a final arbitration, because as I understand it, the IEB does have, for lack of a better term, a veto power in some of those adjudications if the board decides to do that. And so, again, I would refer back to the policy manual and the tribunal rules on how that works. And again, that is a moving target that lots of very well-meaning people have been spending a lot of time on. and I applaud their efforts, but we're going to have to continue to work through that.
Great, thank you, Jeff. And Dan, does the tribunal have jurisdiction over a matter where a member disagrees with a decision by the IEB? And do you believe that the tribunal has the authority to overturn an IEB decision?
Okay, so there's two questions here. First part of the question is with regard to when a member disagrees with a decision by the IEB. I hate to cop out of this one, but without, and I think others may have alluded to it, but without details as to what the disagreement is, it depends, right? If the disagreement has a cause under that permits it to be raised and a decision was made that they can then be vectored to the Tribune, yes, but I don't know that disagreement is sufficient. And with respect to the ability of the Trib to overturn a decision by the board, I mean, Jeff hit it right on the head. We are operating in, a corporate law, corporate governance environment, and there are limitations on that. So it's again, the answer to that is it depends, and it would be subject to a number of factors. And yeah, as Jeff said, a lot of people have been working on this, and it's a tough question. But I don't have a definitive answer for this one. You'd have to have a lot of facts and details to really give you a definitive call.
All right, thank you, Dan. That was a big question. And we're going to have one more question before we do closing statements, and we're going to try to limit it to 1 minute each. So we'll start with you, Dan. Of our core values, which one of the core values are you most aligned with and why?
Which one of the core values am I most aligned with and why? Isn't the purpose of having the core values so that you don't rank them and that you align with all of them? I hate to cop out like that, but the purpose of having a value set is that they are all equally important. So I'm not to be, and I'm sorry to the question. I'm going to be a little obstinate on this. I think we all should do our best to align with all of the values, especially when we're talking about the Trib who's making these decisions. And that should be the forefront of our minds. I don't know that I can give you one that I have a particular affinity for or that I align more with. We all should strive daily to achieve all of them. And I know it sounds like a cop-out, but it really is what I believe. I'll leave it at that, Andrew.
No, it's a fair answer. Jeff, how about you? Which core value do you align with and why?
Again, I like Dan's answer a lot. They're core values. I mean, when I was in the Army, we had the Army values, and we were expected to uphold all of them. At any given day, you might have one or more of them challenged more than others, and that may be a factor in what we experience. But I mean, they're either core or they're not. And so I hope that I exude all the core values. Again, some of them may get challenged in one particular aspect, courage or compassion or candor or whatever we're talking about. The commitment is there regardless. And so I'm struggling to answer that, Andrew. It's a tough question to pick one out.
No problem. It's another fair answer. Carrie, how about you?
Yeah, I think I'm with the guys on this. I think you should have all. I think it's, especially as a member of the Trib, I think it's important to strive to achieve all of those goals and have those in our forefront of your mind when we're making decisions. These are why I'm a member of the fraternity. It's why I continue to be actively involved in the fraternity, is I think devotion to all of these. So I think I'd have to agree with both Dan and Jeff on this.
All completely fair answers, and I appreciate your candor. We're going to hit the closing statements now because we're hitting on about 10 minutes to go, and we have 3 minutes for each closing statement. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for such great answers for all those questions. And we're going to start with Carrie for her closing statement. Carrie, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to keep it real brief, and I want to thank everybody for their time and for listening to our answers. And I am always honored and always floored when I get the opportunity to work with my brothers, sisters, and siblings in this fraternity. I think this is a great organization that does, amazing things and has such a potential to serve the profession and the legal community and its members. And so I am honored to be here and to be with these gentlemen who I am also in great awe of and their accomplishments within the fraternity. And I would look forward to serving in the role in the tribunal if I'm elected. And if anybody has any questions for me, I'm available and I'd be happy to answer those. But again, thank you everybody for your time and your attention and your commitment to this fraternity, because I think that this is a people-driven organization. It's a member-driven organization. That's one of the other things that I love about it. And so I look forward to seeing what we can do for the fraternity in the upcoming biennium. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. And Jeff, how about your closing statement? You have 3 minutes.
Again, thank you to everyone who joined us on this call tonight. Thank you to Andrew for being the moderator once more and taking these questions on for us. And thank you to the people who asked questions. These are challenging issues that we're dealing with, and the role of the tribunal, the interplay between members and the executive board and the tribunal is a tough thing to crack. And I appreciate that everyone is honestly and vigorously trying to find the best solution. And I look forward to continuing that process if elected to the tribunal for this next biennium, because I think it's an important thing that we resolve amongst ourselves how we're going to deal with hurt feelings and problems that come up in this big family we call bad. Because I do view it as a family, and I do view it as something that we're supposed to get along. And when we don't, it kind of hurts the family heart, if you will. And we need to get things resolved, and we need to get things moved forward that's as fair as possible for everyone, but yet holds people accountable when they make bad choices too. Because that's just the way life happens. And so I look forward to working with other members of the tribunal. I would love to serve with Carrie and Dan. And I look forward to seeing everyone at convention. And again, thank you for your time and attention this evening.
Thank you, Jeff. And Dan, your closing statement, 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody who's participated. I especially want to thank Andrew, who I know has more than enough work to be doing, especially at this time of year as we approach convention. And I can't imagine that there's other things he couldn't be doing. But thank you for, as always, just absolute dedication. And thank you for everybody that asked the thoughtful questions. I think, I mean, frankly, I can't say enough about Jeff and Carrie. I think the world of them, and I would love to be able to serve with them in this capacity, really in any capacity, frankly, because I learn from them all the time. And I haven't had as much opportunity to work with Carrie recently, but I have in the past, and it's always been fantastic. I think maybe, why is the corporate guy who's the CPA going to be the sappy one? Well, I'm going to do it anyway. I think what these two also haven't mentioned, and I think they'll probably agree with me, even though it's a little direct, similar to me, maybe the greatest strengths we have is the mistakes we've made. And if you haven't made those mistakes and been in a position where someone may have been making determinations about your future, whether it's academic or however you've come to that, and you're trying to live up to a standard, or you're hoping that someone sees you've met a standard, understanding being in the other position, the inferior position, the non-decision making position, I think is super critical. And Jeff sees it every day in the practice of family law and probates and estates. And I shared some of that early in my career. It's very difficult. And Carrie every day is dealing with people who may lose their very livelihood. And I don't, and I'm not talking about me, I guess, very much. But I want everybody to get a sense of, there's there's great resumes, but there's also great compassion. And I think everybody that's in front of you today, I won't say that about myself. I'd like to think that about myself, and I aspire to that. But I think that's also the strength that you need to have when you serve in this position, is you got to look at the rules, but you also got to understand the person. And you also have to remember when you've been in a situation, maybe not exactly similar, but very similar, where you were subject to an authority, and the tables were different. I appreciate every opportunity to work with everyone and to serve this fraternity. I appreciate being on the opportunity to do this forum, especially given the circumstances of the election. So I look forward to seeing everybody at convention, and I hope I'm one of the people that you decide to put into this position. So thank you very much.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank all the candidates for participating in tonight's forum. We had some really great discussions, some great answers. Additionally, thank you to all the members attending tonight's forum and for the engagement by asking questions. I always appreciate that. And for those who are watching and not registered for convention, please reach out to the executive office. We can definitely assist with getting you registered and help you with funding options. And we're looking forward to seeing you in Pittsburgh in just a few weeks. And that's all we have for tonight. Have a good night. Thank you, everybody.